welcome, whether it be morning, noon, night. We want to thank you for tuning in to the Level Set. I am Attorney Larry Fields, and this morning I have the pleasure of being in community with Dr. Charles Alexander and the Mike Jones as we engage on the last Saturday of Black History Month, and technically in February, but this whole year is going to be Black History for us. But as we engage on the technical last Saturday, February of 2025, we want to talk about individuals that you may or may not know, but we are going to be in conversation with respect to the late Dr. Robert Williams, who was a professor at Washington University, an individual that we've had the pleasure of being in community with. And I told the group earlier this week that I almost took for granted being able to be in intimate spaces with Dr. Williams and his brilliance, but his brilliance was always on display. He played golf with my father-in-law for, probably 50 years. And you knew that this man was brilliant at all times. Arguably one of the best golfers in the group. But it was always an event when we were, able to be in community with him, be it on the golf course or in an academic setting. And I'm still having a very difficult time finding his books, Ebonics. That's a book that I need for my library. In addition to my library, I need it for my practice because Ebonics is that the actual speech in which we have adopted is something that's very, very important to several fact scenarios. So, without further delay, I am going to open up the floor and ask Dr. Alexander to provide the framework in talking about one of his colleagues, and as we delve into these issues this morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good
Good
morning,
morning.
everyone. Excuse me. I'm gonna run through kind of quickly some of the milestones for Doc, and I think they kind of set the stage pretty easily for us, and we can kind of go from there. But again, as a clinical psychologist, um, I've I've been aware of I've been aware of him all my academic, as it relates to psychology. I've been aware of him all my academic and professional life. Um, the interesting thing is that I have been aware of him and didn't know since I was 5 because um, my sister, who is 10 years older than me, um, would have these conversations with my parents about the bitch test. And that kind of that did two things for me. And well, and the second of which was later in life, but immediately those conversations about the bitch test at 5 years of age um, was probably an introduction to, well, what even probably it was an introduction into my racial consciousness at that time. And Larry, you probably know my sister Karen also because she
The,
goes to
the First Baptist.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And she's a
um
politician also, isn't she?
yeah, she's on city council.
All right.
And um and so and she and it was also her that, I mean, I didn't know it was the Black Arts Movement, but she introduced me to the Black Arts Movement at a very young age, both because of her her artistic abilities in both dance and theater and design. But that's that put unbeknownst to me, that put Robert Williams on my radar at the age of 5. And so, but
Now, could you talk a little bit about the bitch test?
yep. And so in 72, he created the Black Intelligence Test of Cultural Homogeneity. And so essentially the bitch test is that it um, is a test designed to measure the intelligence of Black folks, to be used instead of the standards, um, what is considered the gold standard for psychological testing, or the Wechsler scales. And and the problem with the Wechsler scales, or the Kaufman scales, or the Woodcock Johnson, um, uh, any number of tests, is that they they are culturally biased, and they're not so much. It's and then it's really kind of the because people have gotten into this piece where we kind of zone out and tune out the testing, because our immediate thing is we can't do it because it's culturally biased. And it's not so much that you're taking the test and it's saying crazy things about Black folks. It's not biased in that way. They're biased in that the content doesn't really isn't reflective of what x number of Black folks are going to experience. So as an example, um, in the on the Wechsler scales, there's a question that I think is still on there. It has this particular question. It's a comprehension question and a judgment question that typically survives revisions. And it is, if you're walking down the street and you found a wallet, what would you do with it? And so, and this, it's so, you know, so the right answer is, you find a police, the right answer per the Wechsler scale is you find a police officer and turn it in, or you put it in the mailbox, and da 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 da. And so, um, and so for us, the answer could be you put it in the mailbox. It could be you might give it to a pastor. Um, it probably ain't you gonna give it to the police, right? And so it's those types of things, the those mainstream tests, they lack cultural nuance, is what the issue is, right? Because the math is the same, right? And
You
and
come to
so
my house, you're gonna bring it back right where you got it from. I told you not to bother anything.
I told
Bring
you
it
don't
back to
bother
where
that
you
damn
got it
thing.
from.
Just leave it right
Bring it
there.
back to where you got it from.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so and
Charles,
uh-huh.
Larry, yeah, Larry just said something. My father's advice to me that I've lived with for 75 years now, he said, if you don't drop nothing, don't pick nothing up.
Don't pick
Okay.
nothing up. Right. So we have a whole different code.
Hey man, hold this for me. I'll be right back. No, sir.
Right.
No, sir. No,
No, sir.
sir.
No, sir.
No, sir. No, sir. No, sir.
And
It's a whole different cultural piece, Doc. It's a whole...
Right.
yes. And and to see that even gets and so that's the bitch test, and that's the purpose for the bitch test. But that then gets to Ebonics, which I also think is very important because, it just necessarily follows that he goes from test analysis and construction for the reasons that he did into Ebonics. And that is because Ebonics is just a combination of black and phonics, Ebonics, right? And but that's a natural progression because, again, the implicit bias that exists in testing is language based. And so, to contextualize that for folks, he started to talk about the language patterns and the fact that we have a distinct language pattern. And so, so one of the examples that that he provided was like, teacher tells teacher asks Johnny to go sit down. Johnny's up. He's not being disruptive. He's just up, and he's up sharpening his pencil. So the teacher says, Johnny, will you sit down? Well, Johnny finishes sharpening his pencil, and then he goes and he sits down. And then so there's this series of things that Johnny does that the teacher asks that he does after he gets done doing what he's doing. He ultimately gets sent to the principal because he's not following instructions. The principal asks, well, why don't you follow the teacher's instructions? And he says, she ain't tell me to do nothing. Right? And so that's a difference in engagement. Because if he was at home, his mama would have said, boy, sit down. Or if he had a black teacher, the black teacher would have said, boy, sit down. She was, Johnny, go sit down. She would have said, Johnny, will you please? Or can you sit down? Or da-da-da-da. And so there's a more direct manner in which we communicate also that oftentimes creates a barrier, and it impacts, how we complete tasks and even how we learn information. And so that becomes the importance of Ebonics. And then also the fact, and I give you another great example for me, and it's us and nicknames, right? And I went to school not knowing my name was Charles. They kicked me out of preschool. They ain't send me home. They allowed me to come. And this is the beauty of Douglas. There was a letter sent. I found this letter. It was a letter sent to my parents that, we regret to inform you that Charles has been dropped from our rolls. I'm going to school every day, but I'm not answering the roll because they ain't calling Pete. I'm looking at like, this Charles guy. He'll never come to school. Who this dude? And so, but I got lunch every day. I learned every day. Like, they couldn't account for who this little Petey kid was, but they didn't send me home. But they did send a note to Charles and Barbara Alexander saying they had dropped their son from the roll. But that's another, one of those things that, and kind of like growing up in a neighborhood. And like, I'm still like all those, so I'm the youngest of 5, and it's 14 years between me and my oldest brother. And so there's all of these people, in their 70s that I still don't know their names. I call them the names I've ever known them, and like I learned a cat's name just the other day, just on Facebook. This dude Rebo. And there ain't nobody named their kid Rebo. Oh. But that these are these are the things that impact us also in a learning space. And that became really kind of a bedrock for Dr. Williams, and that, helping us also to understand this. And so, I wasn't really in tune I wasn't really in tune with I wasn't in tune with the Ebonics piece until the 80s and 90s, when it became an issue in the in the I think it was the Oakland affiliated school district, where they were trying to make it the basis for learning. But I do remember at that time, I think this is probably going on either right before I left for college or immediately, getting to college. But and I thought it was very interesting. I thought, in hindsight, I think it's very interesting because, so he ended up testifying in Congress about the importance of Ebonics and Black language and how that impacts the learning. In anything that doesn't give, take into account, our different communication and learning styles. So, because this thing gets layered. So if we have a different way of communicating, then we have a different way of encoding and storing, or encoding, processing, and storing information. And then it stands to reason then that there's a difference in terms of what we need in order to retrieve and produce. Right. So it's this whole sequential piece. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I want to me, the great beauty of our relationship on Saturday is we really are like jazz musicians in a jam session. So we just start to play, and somebody starts, and then they say something that, if you're a musician, you hear that, and you say, "Oh shit, wait a minute, okay, I was gonna be here," but and you gave, it was something we kind of talked about in the warm up, but literally, I met Bob 1970, 1971, when I'm still in college, and this is kind of the tail end of all the Black stuff. I mean, everything that was Black defining, you could really say, was from 65 to about 74 and stuff. So it's this really tight window. And why I think he's so relevant today, and because we kind of talked about, we might be talking about him, is that is literally the only time in our experience here in America where the idea of Black reality was centered to us. The idea of a Black reality was always peripheral in our community. But we had about 10 years where that was the thing. And what it did was it legitimized who we were to ourselves. And it really was, and you're the clinical psychologist, and that's what Bob was. It was really the withdrawing intellectually, psychologically, emotionally from America, and that white America that presumes that their standard is not the white standard, that their standard is objective reality. It was really an assertion, and Bob was one of the documenters of that. Now, that in this universe, there are multiple realities. And that's kind of even consistent with Einstein's theory of relativity and quantum, and the whole notion of quantum physics. There are multiple realities, and they're happening simultaneously. So you have no absolute point of view. And I'll mention something that Larry told me to mention. If you take the circumference of a circle, there's 360 degrees. But what's geometrically unique about that it's all 360 degrees or equal distance from the center. So there is no point on the circle that has a superior uh, uh, status to any other point on the circle. They're all equal distance from the center, which is like saying they're all equal distance from the ultimate reality. And how you see it on degree 120 could be totally different than how it looks on degree 45. But equally, they're all true because that's your perspective, your lived experience. And you mentioned something earlier about the 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 cognitive games that kind of get played, and when you're operating in somebody else's reality as opposed to one that you define, and you could really say, because this is Black History Month, literally that was the foundation that Woodson was trying to create. And people like Bob, Derek Bell have built on that. So I have always believed, not always believed, since I got old, I believe that there is a legitimate Black canon, both intellectually, aesthetically, and that you can literally educate yourself about the universe and be dealing in historical reality, objective reality from a Black perspective, because Beethoven's Ode to Joy is just a 17th century European or 18th century European musical expression of a certain perspective on humanity. And so is Duke Ellington in any of the things. So our stuff is legitimate as anybody else's on the planet. And I'm not even talking about the whole African diaspora. I'm talking about our stuff. Okay, I mean literally right here. If we are a unique part of that diaspora, and because our experience is so unique, we have developed a culture that has allowed us to not only survive, but in some measure thrive. And we have intellectually and culturally expressed that throughout since we've been here. And what white supremacy and what you and the brother's name slips my mind, but he said if you don't understand white supremacy, you'll be confused about everything.
Neely Fuller.
Neely Fuller.
Yeah.
Everything else in this country will confuse you.
Everything else in the country will confuse you. And it's what white America has done and what Trump and MAGA America and the white Christian nationalists, as we have pulled the cover off, it's like a trick. The magician is not doing magic. He's just distracting you. So he wants you to watch his right hand because the trick is going to be in his left hand. That's how he pulls it off. And so when you start to understand, quit being a child and say it ain't magic, it's a trick. Now I'm trying to figure out what the trick is. You're in a different relationship with him. And this whole notion of anti-wokeness, of course, they got to be anti-wokeness, because to be awake is to be conscious of where you are and who you are. If you sleep, the only thing that comes to, as the old hustlers say, the only thing that comes to sleep is a dream, and that ain't real. And when you wake up, it's gone. So really, the whole notion of the Black Power movement, the Black Studies movement, the Black Arts movement was to codify and bring legitimacy to an intellectual context that we could understand and explain our reality to us and anybody else who was interested. And Bob Williams uh, is one of those people, and there are a lot of them that we don't know all the names, and we don't revere uh, our own heroes. We make celebrities out of people that white folks find acceptable, as
And,
opposed
and
to
and Mike, that gets back to your circumference issue because what happens is if in fact we are both equal to the truth, the person with the power is the one that yields that yields the truth, particularly when we are deferring power, because there's power in recessing from a situation,
right.
which is what this whole movement was about. Well, it wasn't even about that. It was about elevating to something higher. And when you elevate to something higher, you automatically let go of those things that are of lesser significance. And I would maintain that those black thought leaders elevated to the highest of highs.
I agree. And Charles, you're the clinical psychologist, but uh, my cursory understanding of any ther- therapy uh, work is ultimately a therapist would tell you when you're in a negative situation, you can't change the people that you're in the situation with, but you can change yourself. And when you change, the situation changes. Could get worse, could get better, but it's a different situation. It's a different situation now because you made a decision to do something. So the first thing that somebody is teaching you wants you to do if you're in an abusive situation is find the strength and the clarity to leave the situation because that's the answer to be into when you're in an abusive situation is get the hell out of there.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I got that right from a lay standpoint.
I think you did.
Okay.
And I think I think well, it's not even a think. Um, one of the things that because he's also very important. He's very important in terms of um, how you contextualize, and speaking to you, Mike, how you contextualize that period of time for yourself. Um, high school, college to young adulthood, and the manner in which you guys were, processing the movement and, making your analysis about civil rights versus Black power, right? And that, um, and and he notes this. There's a interview. Well, let me step back for a second. Um, so a couple of other things, and I probably should have started with this, is that he got his doctorate from Washington University. So he's from Arkansas, and he eventually gets here, and he gets his doctorate from WashU. Um, he stays in St. Louis. He's working. I think he's working over at. I know he's working for the Veterans Administration. I think he's working over at Jefferson Barracks, and he's chief of psychology over there. WashU recruits him back, and um, and he is co-founder of Black Studies at WashU, and then immediately becomes the first chair of the program. But in his description of that in this interview that he did with Gerald Early, who is now the director of the Black Studies program, is that he said when he came back to WashU, the black students thought he was a sellout, and that they thought that he represented the interests of white folks, and that they was really just bringing them some puppet, in order to do this, that, or the other. And then hearing him say that, it brought to mind again, just as I was saying, like certain, because we have a certain ethos, we have a certain way in which we hear, we encode and interpret and store information. There are certain things that bring the stuff out. And so when he said that, of course, then I immediately think about you, and you've even referenced it in what you just disclosed, and that, particularly at that time, y'all weren't asking for inclusion, you were asking for yours, right? And it was about us, and it was about da 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 da, and that's exactly how he said he was received, by your contemporaries who were at WashU at the time.
I would say WashU for the black student movement, WashU was the tip of the spear. Okay, okay, they they was the brothers and sisters that were the smartest. Okay, literally. Also, they had the most liberal white folks too. Okay, if you were at a public university, if you take over something at WashU, the dean is going to talk to you, the president of the university. If you take over something at the University of Missouri, the police go come, okay, and your ass is going to be in jail. So it was a different vibe, but fundamentally, and I can tell you what the mentality was in 1970 because it was mine. If you had a meeting, or if you did something, if the system said yes, and that's the other thing, we didn't talk about individual white folks. We talked about the system.
The system.
The system became the enemy. Don't even worry about the personality. And if they agreed to it, you say we asked for the wrong thing. He said, why? Because they said yes. Okay. And then fundamentally, we were in opposition. So even an accommodation that we quote won was not the right answer. Because ultimately, when now Malcolm gives a speech about we don't understand revolution, because if we did, we'd be scared. But we used the language of revolutionaries. So it was superficial and rather bourgeois, but contextually, intellectually, it was about overthrowing the system, not. And I would say to you, Charles, that's more than 50 years ago, and in that time, it's when your philosophical and intellectual orientation about politics, life, philosophy in America got shaped. And I would tell anybody, and have said this over the years, my politics, tactically, I've made hundreds of adjustments politically. Strategically, my politics has not changed since I was 19 years old. Okay, it was when some folks go to church, and that's when they found Jesus. That in 1920 was when I understood that this needs to be about the revolution, and I haven't changed since. Now, whatever tactical accommodations I make day to day has nothing to do with how I feel about who we are, where we are, what I feel about America. But part of that is, and you talk about the black ethos and the bitch test, but part of the cultural intelligence is you also learn how to hustle the white system. because you ain't always in a position. Most of the time, you're not in a position to confront it. So you learn to operate like the gorilla does. So that's the other reason we mentioned uh, early, I think a couple of weeks ago about Fidel or Mao. But the reason they became models intellectually, intellectually, not so much because of their quote military strategies, because we wasn't in no military engagement, but learning to think about how does somebody who's outgunned, don't have resources, or how do you launch a uh, a liberation struggle? Because that's the other terms we use. Is that what Mao did in China was he liberated China from the West. Okay, what Fidel did in Cuba was he liberated Cuba from America. Okay, so these are what uh, uh, in Rhodesia, which became Zimbabwe or Angola and Mozambique. Those were liberation struggles. Abdul Nasser in Egypt was a Pan Africanist. Gaddafi was a Pan Africanist. They didn't think of themselves as Arabs. They thought of themselves as Africans. They just happened to be at the northern part of Africa. Now, if you read American newspapers and all that kind of stuff, they don't qualify them as that. So you learned that you had to go to the source of other people's stuff to hear how they talk about themselves. And you kind of basically withdrew yourself from, not only, you didn't have a desire to be included in America. You were physically here, and there wasn't nothing you can do about that. I ain't got nowhere to go. We don't know where I would go if I do. But this is where I stay. But this ain't my home. Okay, now we may be homeless, but I stay in America. I live here.
Sound like a good Christian now, Mike.
Huh?
Sound like a good Christian now, Mike. Be careful.
But
Okay.
that right there, that like even the way in which you lay that out, Mike Jones, that kind of again that speaks, from in terms of our language and our use of language,
Right.
our use of this language, you know, ain't nobody else other than us gonna know what you talking about when you say this is where I stay.
Right.
He stay over there. We used to stay there, right?
But I live.
But yeah, I mean, and it's all of these things, um, and but it's also from that perspective that we have to look at this ongoing battle, and there's a degree to which we even have to be careful when we're identifying, like so we have to. So when we use these terms, so like when we use the civil rights movement and we use Black Power movement and we use, and Black arts and Black studies, we have to look at all of these things as a continuum and resist the urge that is put upon us by these other folks who think differently. They compartmentalize.
Right.
And they try to force us to compartmentalize, and so that then makes it difficult. If we fall for that narrative, then it makes it difficult for us to see this fight as as on a continuum, in that we've all been fighting towards the same goal, certainly at differing times with different means and for different reasons, but it is all about somebody's relative thought about what's best for us.
And
because
Charles,
this is where we stay.
and Charles, we've already created the the art form that captures that. It's jazz.
It's jazz.
It's jazz. Okay, that jazz is a continuum. Talk to any musician you. I saw a little snippet of a Dizzy Gillespie interview once, and the question was, "What about Louis Armstrong?" And Dizzy said, "Ain't no him, ain't no me." Simple as simple as that. All of this is part of the continuum, okay? And that's even consistent with how I always say, I have always said, uh, nobody ever asked me this, but I think the two most influential figures in the 20th century are Albert Einstein and Mao Zedong, because they both redefined reality. Einstein, from the standpoint of physics, and he came late to quantum physics, but his theory of relativity made quantum physics possible. And he said they're right. He didn't say that at the beginning. And quantum physics explains the universe in a whole different way. And Mao Zedong turned Karl Marx and Lenin on their head and say you could have a communist revolution in an agrarian society, and I'm going to show you how some peasants can overthrow an imperial empire that's backed by Western imperialists. Okay, and that model, what Mao did in China, took him 25 years. But what that model did in China what he did in China became the model for liberation struggles throughout the world in the 20th century. And it's those liberation struggles that changed how, first of all, it beat back European imperialism, and America had to then fill the gap for white supremacy. And it ain't got enough army, ain't got enough ass to do it. At every place America has gone, they've lost to the guerrilla. They lost in Vietnam. They lost in Iraq. They lost in Afghanistan. There has been nowhere where white supremacist imperialism has won the battle. Now, for 400 years, about the 1600s up until the 20th century, dominant politically, economically, and in some ways culturally dominated. But what you're watching them do, what you're watching Trump, I would argue what Trump is trying to do right now, or the people behind him, because I don't think he can do anything. He's a grifter and a thief, but he's a useful idiot. And what they're trying to do is figure out how to maintain their hegemony on this planet and continue it. And I think you are looking at the end of a 400-year run of white domination, European white domination on the planet, and something else will emerge, but it damn sure won't be all white no more.
And I want to go back to all of those things, because like this necessarily is going to lead us into our next part of the conversation, because Dr. Williams is also, a reference, co-founder of Association of Black Psychologists, and I've always stated, his co-founding of the Black Studies program at WashU and then becoming a director in 70. And but that, and it's like it's that was our guerrilla warfare.
Right.
And I think that, and as you were saying that, that's where our fight is, and that that's where our fight is like when we look at when we look at these fights against the colonial power, we haven't we haven't always done a good job of contextualizing and figuring out what about that works for us.
Right.
And so um so like I would argue that that Carter G. Woodson was one of our greatest strategists with regard strategists, excuse me, with regard to guerrilla warfare in the learning environment. This is how we gonna do this, and we gonna hit them like this, and we gonna hit them here, 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 and here. Meanwhile, because we are miseducated Negroes, we arguing about February. And so, but that's the importance of these organizations. That's the importance of the Black Arts Movement. That's the importance of the Black Studies movement, because it posits us in this space, and it encourages us to take those things that that are that are uniquely us, and it challenges us to use those things in this place where we stay. This ain't where we from, but this where we stay. And the guerrilla warfare, and in guerrilla warfare, you use what you got to beat the enemy. Right. And that's how we have to start to look at this thing. And that's what these, and that's what these people did. And that's, and that's kind of, and that was one of the other points, like with Bob Williams and with Robert Williams, in that, and starting and founding ABSI, he was responsible. So the ABSI has this 10-point plan, and so, and that, again, that's another one of these things that's a recurrence in our organization. 10-point plan. Everybody got a 10-point plan. Everybody got some kind of
because Mao had a 10-point plan.
So it all comes from somewhere, right?
Right. It comes from somewhere. I mean, there ain't no accident. Okay.
Right. And so for ABSI, it was built around. It was written. He wrote it around building capacity for the Black psychologists to do the work for Black people. Right. And so, and that's how we have to look at the thing, and which is what is fundamental, because folks haven't read The Miseducation of the Negro. They don't understand that that's what the book is, that the miseducated Negro, and you've said this a million times, is working to solve the problems of white folks as opposed to solve the problems for us. And so you said we have a canon. He is a manifestation of that canon, of that direct line from what Carter G is saying, all the way, he's one of those people that takes it from theory to practice.
Right.
And he does it, and he did it in the context of clinical psychology. Larry, you were about to say?
Actually, I was just going to say that he did it in every vein. I mean, I was just agreeing with you in every single vein. I can remember, well, one of my favorite reflections on Dr. Williams is his time used as an expert witness in legal cases. And so he expanded the envelope beyond the sphere of academics. In one particular case, He was the expert witness of for this brother that was a manager whose white secretary had accused him of sexual harassment. And the fact scenario is that they went to the manager's home at lunch, and that he put a couple steaks on the grill for them. They ate the steaks. He engaged in fellatio, and then they had, they copulated sex. Well, Dr. Williams's testimony was that black men, by and large, don't engage in oral sex. And so there's no way that your story could be could be true. Well, lo and behold, based on his testimony, the brother was cleared of sexual harassment. But my point is that when you have the moxie to have your own set of standards for yourself, separate and apart from the dominant, the quote unquote dominant culture in a place, that is, I mean, it's huge. But I mean, you've been doing that your whole life, Dr. Alexander. The fact that you went to kindergarten and embodied the spook that sits next to the door, and embodied himself, stayed below the radar. The man's a ghost. These epigenetic things that we have are important too. but but Dr. Williams, that's who he was. He advanced us in our needs the entire time. And I know we could talk about him for hours, but there's another subject that we need to get to. So I would like for you all to make your make your closing ties here, and we've got to revisit Dr. Williams at a additional point.
Charles,
Mhm.
just before you do that, you said something a moment ago that I want Larry to stick a pin in that and make a note. You said theory and practice. You know, all the things that I've read, one of the things that has always stayed with me, and I was not too young to appreciate it for the impact that it had, but it in a state imprinted me that Mao Zedong had a seminal essay, kind of difficult read, and you wouldn't read it as recreation, but the essay was the theory, the unity of theory and practice, and it was talking fundamentally that practice has to be tied to theory. Theory has to be able to be executed in practice, and to be successful at overthrowing the oppressor, winning the struggle, changes it. You need theory and practice, and they have to be unified. And again, from Carter G. Woodson to Bob Williams, Du Bois, what these brothers and some sisters too are working on is a theory for our practice. And I think part of the reason we're so lost today is we're episodic, and we no longer, Larry, to use your term of art, we no longer have theory of the case. So we don't even know why we know we in court, and we know we in the trial, and we ain't got a clue. And there's the evidence, but we ain't got a clue what we gonna do with it.
And I think as we're transitioning into our next kind of topic, it speaks to our lack of understanding of the theory of the case. And just to close, one of the things I just wanted to say about Dr. Williams, I kind of I did a little overlap that was incorrect. So there was certainly this conversation in the mid '80s, about the time I'm leaving school and going to college, about Ebonics, and now it's in my household oftentimes because it's driving, the whole concept is driving my mama crazy. And then, but when he's testifying, the cool thing about when he's testifying in Congress Um, the chair lady for that testimony was Maxine Waters.
Oh, wow.
And so I just think that that's awesome, because then you got a St. Louisan, you know, who's literally bringing him to the fore, and she's guiding that conversation. And so uh, I think that for me, that's another one of those, one of those coups for St. Louis that you know we got to speak to, because I know that people don't know and understand it that way, because don't nobody knows you from St. Louis, first of all.
Right.
And so so to have that moment,
Or that she Bill's Clay's cousin.
it's like, I didn't know that. and so and
That's
so
Sean.
yeah, and so and that's the other thing about even this story about about Doc. We being St. Louis, we are front and center in this war. But that's not how we think about it in St. Louis, and that's certainly not how you know many other combatants think of it. They just think we the Midwest, and we that's but we're literally ground zero. So so those are my thoughts on brother. And I didn't get a chance to meet him when I started attending AV-Sci. I don't. I went to. I went to maybe 3 conferences, and the 3 conferences that I attended, he was not in attendance, and I didn't. And then on my side of it, I didn't exercise, my agency when I was in and out of the city, um, to even, make those things happen for me. But very, very much an admirer and a beneficiary of his work.
And you are a derivative of his work as well. You are picking it up, and I can tell you that, knowing him and knowing, some of his children, he would be quite proud of. I can tell you that he would be quite proud of the work that you are doing, and I can tell you that with 100% certainty about that, because we had conversations about Gerald Early and the job that he was doing over there, and what he expected. So no, Doc, you're cut from the same fabric. But as we move to our next topic, we want to take time, and probably not enough time. Before I do that, Mike, you did mention the women in that field as well. Let me say a special shout out to Dr. Amanda Murphy, who at Yateman Center gave her and devoted her life to mental health sphere, group homes, and mental health in our community as well. But as we move on to our next topic, yesterday, the 21st of February, marked the um, I don't even want to celebrate it as an anniversary, but the date in which our Malcolm, brother Malcolm, was assassinated. And it marks the same time period in which we are still fighting for things that he stood upon. In fact, he's as relevant today as he was when he was assassinated. You can take and plug in any book, any specific speech, and it is more relevant today than it has been in the past. These things have gone well beyond aging well, and we are at a point where we are now in the throes of a black boycott, if you will. So I would love to hear the thoughts of you all on both those two things, their interplay, and where we are at this point.
Okay, I guess uh, I'll start. Malcolm, he said a lot of things, But one of the things that he said that always resonated with me when he was asked what he would support, they asked him about a strategy or something, and Malcolm said, I'll support anything that's intelligently directed and designed to get results. So as we talk about the boycott, and yesterday commemorates the day when Malcolm was murdered, I think if we look at our current situation, I think those words should be what guides us. What is it? No matter what it is, it has to be intelligently directed and designed to get results. And so, if it is, we should be supporting it. If you just pissed off today and reacted, that don't meet Malcolm's standard. And it means we fundamentally wasting time. So one of the things you learn as a practicing politician, and you learn it in most any profession, but it's not what you're doing. It's always about what happens next. When Miles got asked, what happens when you play a wrong note? His answer was, there are no wrong notes. It depends on what you play next. Okay? So the question is not about the boycott in and of itself. It's about what's next. And that's what Malcolm means by intelligent, because the boycott is not going to change anything on the 28th. I mean, fundamentally, we have a boycott on the 28th, and that's as far as you thought this through.
Which means that it's totally contrary to Malcolm's point, right?
Right.
And therein lies the problem. So on November 10th, 1963, Malcolm gave a message to the grassroots in Detroit. And this is one of the things that he said, and this is about the moment. The economic philosophy of Black nationalism only means that our people need to be re-educated into the importance of controlling the economy of the community in which we live, which means that we won't have to constantly be involved in picketing and boycotting people in other communities in order to get jobs. And so here we are on the verge of a reactionary boycott because we mad about companies' DEI policies with no thought or appreciation to the fact that, A, we don't have a plan. First and foremost, our plan is the boycott. We ain't got no plan to manage whatever might happen as a result of the boycott, because what ain't gonna happen is that they reinstate DEI. So we already know that going in. So we don't even know what the plan is for the 29th. And they're also baked into the plan, which is clearly an indication that, we hadn't built on what Malcolm said or what many have said before, during, and after him. Like, we haven't really meaningfully, built our capacity. Is that, so like built into the plans, like if you need food or medication, you should shop. Well, we all need food and medication. And not only do we need food and medication, most of us gonna shop at Walmart. So if you go shop
you
at
shop
Walmart,
where you can afford to shop.
Yes. And so 60% of Black folks got high blood pressure. Them jokers need medication. So they're going to buy their medication from Walmart sometime this week.
Well, I ain't
So,
buying my high blood pressure, but I'm gonna get that Viagra.
and
I'm
so,
I got that blood pressure, but I'm gonna get that
and so
Viagra.
even if they
That's
don't
what they
buy
say.
on the 28th, they're going to buy this week.
Right.
Right. And so that's the foolishness of this whole piece. The other part of it is Walmart is Walmart is the single largest employer, private employer of Black folks. The average Black business, if it got employees, hires 4 Black folks. We don't have no capacity to manage the worst case scenario attached to this if there was anything that even looked like success. Because if it really impacted their bottom line, and the fact that they're even rolling back DEI suggests that they don't really care about us relative to their bottom line. The, they don't care about who gets displaced. And the fact of the matter is, Walmart and Walgreens and Target have been screaming for the past year about massive closures and layoffs anyway. They're downsizing, and those things already disproportionately impact Black and brown communities. Now, if you tell me that your strategy is, let's bring them down, that's fine. I'm good with that. But where the people gonna eat and where they gonna get their medication from? Because we don't have the infrastructure to replace that. So, there's a shortage of groceries. So we got food deserts and pharmacy deserts. Yes, sir, Mike John.
I was gonna tell you, say that part again, okay? I'm down with bringing it down. Just tell me what we gonna do next.
What we gonna do next?
Yeah, okay. And that's what it means to be in leadership, man. Okay, that front. I regularly say there's a difference between being in charge and being in lead. Okay, if you're the lead dog on a sled team of 7 dogs or 5, because they'll be pulling in pairs. The only one that can see the road is the lead dog. Every other dog is looking at another dog's ass. Okay, and they have to trust the lead dog to take them where they need to do, because they're going to always have to follow, because they connected together. Okay, so the lead dog is critically important, and just not any dog can be the lead dog. In those sled teams, they look at them puppies and they say, like, you hear the farmers say, that dog won't hunt. This one, the lead dog is the same way. And our problem, and I'll say this without fear of somebody taking offense, our problem is we got lead dogs that should never be pulling the sled, be the leader of the sled. Ain't got a goddamn clue how to read the road, where they're going. All of us get regularly, the whole sled, the driver, the sled, the whole team goes over the cliff or goes into the ditch, because the lead dog didn't understand their responsibility, and we allow people who ain't got that skill set to be in the front of the team.
And in this particular situation, we have this guy who has a show on MSNBC. He can't be the lead dog.
Right.
Our lead dog can't work for MSNBC.
Right.
That don't even go together. And so here it is. And so that's part of the problem. The second part of the problem is because, in my various conversations with this, you know, people, well, boycotts have worked in the past. When have we boycotted where black people work? We boycott because black people can't get service
But they
and
couldn't
black people
work
couldn't
there.
work and you couldn't buy there. You couldn't eat there. So the boycotts were don't spend where you can't work. You know, don't ride the bus because you're second class citizen. You got to give up your seat anyway. But there was a strategy. And so, like, even and with the Montgomery bus thing, you know, folks be like, well, the only thing they should have did, well, they should have, they should have opened their own. Okay, well, I agree. But before you cast your critique, you should read the narrative because you would find out that there was an injunction that prevented them from opening their own um, bus company because that's what they tried to do. That was going to be the alternative. So not only did they set up, their own carpool system that, uh, you know, not only helped to bankrupt the buses, but also shut down, I'm sure, some considerable amount of local taxis. They also filed to create their own, transportation company, and and the courts kept them for allowing that to happen. But they had that baked in. Ain't nothing baked in for this. Our people already can't get medication. So again, we already got, pharmacy deserts, we got food deserts, and our unemployment, however low it is still twice as high as theirs. And so now you're going, because somebody got to work them jobs. Because for somebody, them the only kind of jobs that they can get. And so you ain't got nothing to replace that with. That can't be your strategy, particularly for DEI. And I'm clear that it has some relative benefits, but DEI for the sake of DEI can go. 71% of the officers of DEI are white folks, and 54% of that 71% are white women.
Wait,
It's probably their fault that we even in this situation.
wait a minute. Charles, I will say this about that. DEI is the affirmative action officer. Okay, back in the day, in the 70s, is like the one Negro with the job. Okay, so what DEI is like affirmative action. It's a good job for one person.
For one person.
And
That's all it is,
and
because it ain't changing the system. And that goes back to our first segment, that your analysis has to be on the system. It's the system you have to bring down, because it's the system that's doing the trick. It ain't the evil, ignorant white person. Okay, that's the evil, ignorant white person is the distraction.
Yep.
The trick is the system. So if
and
you want, if you want to stop the position, deal with the trick. Don't deal with the distraction. Matter of fact, you can ignore evil, ignorant white people intellectually, emotionally, psychologically. You can be complete, because you can be indifferent to them. And the opposite of love ain't hate, it's indifference. Okay? It means I don't care what happens to you. Because if I hate you, that means I got to maintain a relationship with you. Okay? I'm emotionally involved with you because I hate you. If I say I don't give a fuck, then if you dropped off the face of the earth, if they all disappeared tomorrow, I wouldn't care, nor would I miss them.
and
So,
oftentimes DEI provides cover for progress for Black folks anyway.
right.
So that is it provides cover antithetical to progress. Those are the individuals that are going to follow right after human resources when we when we bring our discrimination case and champion the actual
Here, but
They,
it,
Empire.
they've done the same
what,
thing with it that they've done with like union organizing. So they're
right.
able to buy out, white folks from union organizing by putting them into middle management.
Wait, here is the other thing we should be aware, and like I'm now old enough to have been through different iterations of this. Here's what I can tell you about the affirmative action officer and the DEI officer. None of them have ever had operational control of anything. They're
That,
not in
and
charge. They,
that,
they,
say that,
they're
and
not in
talk about
charge
operations.
of it. Yeah, they're not in charge of anything. They don't make any decisions. I've been fortunate enough to run stuff all my life. And it only matters if you're the one that gets to call the shot. If you got to go ask somebody, and or somebody's supposed to consult with you before they decide, okay, I'll check that box, and I'm still gonna do what I want to do. Why? Because I get to make the call. The reason I became a politician is because I want to call my shot. I didn't want nobody calling the shot for me. Now,
Sounds like it. And that is I think we're going to have to end there because we
yeah,
are at the 10:30 mark.
that's right.
But and that is an appropriate spot to end. I want to call my shots. It sounds rather Godfather-esque. Yeah, but
Well,
I
he is the Mike Jones.
well, he is the Mike Jones, and that is something that we need to adopt. And we need to be able to identify power and quit giving up our power, but identify power. People in human resources and DI don't have any power. Those individuals work for one entity, and that's the corporation. So, seeing that it's 10:31, I'm going to ask you all to make your final statements as we close out the last Saturday in Black History Month proper. But we will continue to celebrate Black History as long as we live and throughout this year. Dr. Alexander, please.
And so again, follow the models of right thinking. You know, follow the Robert Williams of the world, the Malcolms of the world, the Carter G's of the world. Don't get caught up in these half-baked reactionary schemes and plots that probably benefit the schemer and the plotter. Do your homework. If you're going to participate in this thing, figure out the life change that you're going to make that that you know positively impacts those closest to you first and foremost, because that's one of the things also that Nellie Fuller always says. Don't go out there and build don't go out there and build no group organization. Get yourself right first. And so if you can't figure out how you're going to negotiate this, then it ain't going to really matter that you hanging out with a bunch of other folks who can't negotiate it either. So figure this thing out, come up with your strategic plan. But please, please, please don't participate in the displacement of potentially thousands of Black workers because you're trying to save the jobs a bunch of white women.
Mike Jones.
And okay, and with that, I'm gonna be I'm gonna be Bill Evans at the end of So What. He played it all. I'm just gonna hit the piano a couple times and we can go home.
Hey, and I'm just going to say this one thing. My mother straightened me out when I was about in the third grade, and she gave me a lesson that has lived with me to this day. Never get mad about something or using something that does not belong to you and it belongs to someone else. So if we want to do the work, we need to create our own things. We can't get mad about the way someone else runs their corporations. We've had ample
Okay.
opportunity
Yeah.
to run. So that's it. And we will see you folks next week. And thank you for joining the level set. On behalf of Dr. Charles Alexander, Mike Jones, you all have a great day.